Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Welcome our guest, Dr. Francisco or Yusuf, very accomplished scholar, multitude of fields. Today he will be speaking in our wisdom traditions. We have three sittings on wisdom traditions. So this first one is by Dr. Francisco, and this sitting is on the Buddha's Eightfold Path.
So Assalamu alaikum everyone, and first of all, Shar Ramadan Kareem to everyone. I hope this, the holy month is always a fantastic opportunity to have a reset in our lives at all kind of levels. I know I needed one, so I very much welcome this opportunity to improve myself. But in secondary school, one of my teachers used to define me in the following way, with a French sentence: "Jeune homme de bonne famille, mais de mauvaise réputation." A young man from a good family with very bad reputation. So I hope to increase my I hope to work on acquiring a better reputation with this month. So speaking of which, we'll talk about the Eightfold Path of the Noble Ones. So in Sanskrit, it's called the Arya Ashtanga Marga. And so in the word Arya Ashtanga Marga, you recognize Marga, which means the way. The Ashtanga means 8 limbs. We have Ashtanga also in the yoga tradition of Patanjali, which we talked about last year, if you remember. And then Arya, of course, does not refer to a race. It's so it means in Sanskrit, and in Sanskrit it means noble. So literally, it actually means the eightfold or the 8-limbed way of the noble ones. Now, who are the noble ones? The noble ones are the ones who strive to achieve enlightenment, which is the prime focus of the teachings of Lord Buddha. So the Eightfold Path is actually part of what we call the Four Noble Truths. So Lord Buddha, after achieving nirvana, decided to teach about his achievements, and especially not so much his achievements, but teach the way to deliver people from the condition in which we are, and that's what we're talking about. And the Four Noble Truths are actually really about our condition. So the Four Noble Truths are the following ones. So the first one is dukkha. Now, dukkha is normally translated as suffering, but I would really put a huge caveat on it, because it actually doesn't mean suffering. If we go in the etymology, it actually refers to the movement of the wheel of a chariot. And so so you have sukha, which normally gets translated as pleasure, but actually means the eased way, the easy way, or pleasant way, or agreeable way with which the wheel is running. And dukkha is the way in which there are impediments. And really, dukkha means refers to the unsatisfactory nature of our lives. And so this is what it really refers to. It's not so much about suffering in a sociological sense, because very often, and I think 19th century Orientalists used to do that a lot, They projected on the teachings of Lord Buddha the conditions that existed in India at that time. Well, people are poor, so obviously a doctrine that would focus on freeing people from suffering would have a huge appeal. But we know now that the socio-economic conditions in India, at least at the time of the Buddha, were not such that we would be talking about catastrophic conditions. So these are, it's really referring to the universal condition of the human being, which is that we find ourselves in a situation where whatever we strive for in this life is unsatisfactory by its very nature. And even if we find some satisfaction in it, it's just temporary, right? And the reason for this unsatisfaction is the second noble truth, which is samudaya, which is basically the origin of it all. And the origin of it all, it's so in Sanskrit it's called Trishna. It's normally people translate it normally as desire, but it's really not that. The Trishna actually means thirst, and it's this thirst for life. It's this desire to fill our void, our inner void, with things outside of ourselves, and of course, with the inevitable consequence that it would never fill the abyss that is inside of us. Now, so how do we solve this? And that's the third noble truth, nirodha. The way of ceasing with this this unsatisfaction, with this painful unsatisfaction about life, is to get rid of this trishna, of this thirst. And the fourth noble truth is what I'm going to talk about today, which is the Eightfold Path of the Noble Ones. Now, something very important that needs to be taken into account is that the Eightfold Path of Lord Buddha, just like the Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they're not chronological steps. They need to be taken at the same time. That is why, as you've probably seen on the poster for this lecture, they're represented in the shape of a wheel, right? So they're all, they're all at equal distance from the center, because they're all equally important. And no matter where you grab the wheel from, what matters is that the wheel needs to be turning. And also, the idea of the wheel turning also means that the understanding of these 8 limbs keeps evolving and changing. The further one goes the further one evolves on the path, and the deeper one goes in terms of understanding. And I think it's important that I stress this, because some people might understand this to be a sort of like a gradual approach of things. There might be some aspect to it, but all of the major teachers of the Buddhist path, really insist that these have to be practiced at the same time. The other thing is that the Eightfold Path is common to all of the main schools of Buddhism, be it the Hinayana tradition, the small vehicle that you find in Sri Lanka, in Cambodia, Thailand, and Burma, or be it the Mahayana tradition, the great vehicle that you find in China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam, or even the Vajrayana tradition, the diamond vehicle, which is esoteric Buddhism that you find in Tibet. And also there is a school of esoteric Buddhism in Japan that was created in the 9th century by the great Kobodaishi Kukai, who is actually one of the founding fathers of Japanese civilization. I could go on talking about him, but that would be for another time. Now, what are these eightfold elements of the path. So first, I'm going to list them up first, and then we'll talk about them. So first one is Samyak Drishti, which means right view or right understanding. The second one is Samyak Sankalpa, which means right resolve. Some people translate it by right thought, but resolve is better. The third one is Samyak Vaj, or right speech. The fourth one is Samyak Karmanta, or right action. The fifth one is Samyak Ajiva, or right livelihood. The sixth one is Samyak Vyayana, or right effort. The seventh one is Samyak Drishti, which some people translate as right mindfulness or right concentration. I will explain later on why this is problematic. Because smriti is actually means memory, right? So we'll talk about it later on. And then Samyak Samadhi, so the right Samadhi, and we'll explain what Samadhi is. But normally, Samadhi refers to the how to put it, higher level of consciousness that one attains through the practice of yogic meditation. And it's the state in which one is freed from the conditioning that imprisons our mind and our consciousness. So I will now go into the details of what this all means. So Samyak Drishti, so Drishti comes from a very interesting verb in Sanskrit, which is, so the root word for Drishti is the root drish, but the word, but the conjugated verb is pashyati. So it's what we probably have here in Sanskrit is two verbs that merge into one. So from a grammatical point of view, it's interesting. So it means right view. And what does it mean? It means that when you are undertaking the path towards enlightenment, you need to be aware, you need to have the right view, the right understanding of things. Why is that? Because one of the reasons we suffer, and one of the reasons why our lives have this elements of, of unsatisfaction, is that since birth, we are conditioned by, first of all, our socialization, the way we are interacting with our environment, be it our parents, be it our larger families, be it the communities we're part of, be it the countries we live in, the culture, and then of course our own personal, happy and not so happy events in our lives. So we all know that thanks to psychology, how, for example, early childhood trauma can really affect people throughout their lives, right? And especially from the age of 0 to 7, right? This is where the motherboard of the embodied mind, is being shaped. And so when the wrong programming gets installed onto the running software of your mind, it has the potential, and actually in most cases it ruins our understanding of life. And the reason why I say this is because, especially as all know, we live now in an age where increasingly, and that's been going on since the 60s, and a growing number of people are being taught since their early age that they're victims of the system, and they're being fed ideologies that are based on resentment, with devastating consequences on the way they view life, on the way they view themselves, and on the way they view their interaction with others. So the problem here, and this is of course something that we also find in the Islamic tradition, which is that children are born with a pure fitra, but it is socialization that brings about these layers of covering that basically constitute the fake self, right? and that condition the way we look at the world and condition the way we experience reality, right? I was telling yesterday, I was having iftar with some relatives, and so we're having these chocolate coated palm biscuits, and I explained this to them. It's like, well, if from the point of view of someone who has the fitra, right? This, chocolate coated biscuit is a chocolate coated biscuit. But, after several experiences through your life, this chocolate coated biscuit might have a completely different meaning for you. For example, if you've been abused by a child and your abuser used to enjoy those biscuits, the way you will view this biscuit will trigger a certain number of emotions and memories that will make you suffer, right? And at the end of the way, hopefully, if you've undertaken, the Eightfold Path properly, then the chocolate coated palm biscuit will again be just a chocolate coated, palm biscuit. You'll be able to see things as they are, without the filters that have been imposed on us. Of course, in the Buddhist tradition, it also goes without saying that, because of the belief of reincarnation, we're also born with certain predispositions, right? So according to the Buddhist tradition, we inherit certain character traits from our previous lives. So on top of the experiences that we encounter in this life, there's also baggage that we carry from past lives. But of course, whether one believes in reincarnation or not, it just, it's a matter of fact that our socialization really distorts the way we look at life, and that is why the Buddhist tradition has put so much emphasis on logic. Especially in the sort of westernized view of Buddhism, Buddhism appears as this sort of like very otherworldly, magical and, mystical thing. But if you enter a monastery that follows the proper Vinaya rules, the Vinaya rules are the monastic rules, and as well as the rules for lay people in the Buddhist tradition, there's a very great emphasis on logic, on Nyaya. So much so, a few years ago, I heard Sheikh Hamza Yusuf had written a piece called "How Buddhists Saved Islam," in a sense that there are elements of logic in Islamic philosophy that we actually inherited from the Buddhists, not from the Greeks. For example, Greek logic does not have the cases of neither nor. Right, and this is something that was taken from Buddhist logic, especially from the school of Nagarjuna. Right, there's actually a huge. I'm presently working on a chapter for a book that talks about one aspect of the exchanges between early Islam and Buddhism, and later on I'll be writing a bigger, proper book about it. In any case, one needs to keep this in mind. So and one of the reasons why people are being trained in logic as well as meditation is that you need to be able to see things as they actually are, without polluting the way you look at the world with your emotions, your own personal experiences, and your own memories, and so on and so forth, right? You need to train yourself to see the chocolate-coated palm biscuit as just what it is, a chocolate-coated palm biscuit, right? Which, by the way, are delicious. So this is why. So one of the things one needs to learn, for example, is the Four Noble Truths. Which is a statement of reality, really. Then another thing is, of course, the law of cause and effect, karma, right? That our actions have consequences, be they good or bad. That's again, and And then, of course, the idea of the absence of a self. So the Buddhist tradition puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that what we see as a permanent self in things is actually an illusion. So I'll give you an example. The fact that we call 4 sticks and a piece of wood a chair is a construction of our minds, right? What actually is, it's just 4 sticks and a piece of wood. But we, in our minds, we call it a chair. So a chair does not actually have a proper existence in and of itself. That's what it means. But beyond that, it is the fact that, you know, the things, the world as we perceive it actually lacks its own nature. And that's a Buddhist teaching. And we can discuss in another time why this is so important, because it's a very, very deep and complicated teaching. Because in later schools of Buddhism, there actually is the teaching of a true nature. So you have a fake self, which is not real. But beyond that, there's what we call the Buddha nature, Buddha Dhatu, which is universal and everyone has it. And enlightenment consists in basically reconnecting to this reality that we actually, that we have this Buddha nature, basically. So understanding these things when undertaking the path is really important. As long as one keeps having a worldview that is either enshrined in materialism or centered around the ego, or centered around a vision of the world that says that, you know, world history is the struggle between the classes or the sexes or whatever, then it's a distorted view of reality, and this will make you suffer, because it is actually meant to do that. It actually, it enjoys doing that, actually. So the second part of the Eightfold Path is the Samyak Sankalpa, the right resolve, the right thoughts. So once you have the right view of things as they are, and of course that understanding keeps evolving and becoming deeper with practice, you basically undertake your thoughts, align with that reality. And the first thing is, what is right thoughts? What is right resolve? First, the first thing is, well, it's the absence of ill resolve and ill thoughts, right? So it's really the endeavor to think the best of people and of other beings, right? And to try to, and I'm going to take this from a Mahayana point of view. It's really to look at the other person as bearing the Buddha nature, irrespective of their outer covering as, a evil person, or someone who's moody or poisons your life, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, irrespective of how sinful they are, they have Buddha nature, and we should endeavor to wish at least that they develop themselves this ability to connect to their Buddha nature. In a beautiful text that is called the Path of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva, great Mahayana philosopher. There's this meditation on forgiving, not only forgiving one's enemies, but really wishing them the best. And when you're meditating, you think of your enemies and you realize how they, just like me, are drowning in an ocean of ignorance and stupidity and violence and and lust and so on and so forth. And whilst I may be trying to get out of it, I also wish for them to basically get out of that state. So this is really important. Like the right thought really is rooted in the notion of compassion for all sentient beings. which, as we'll see later on, is part of the bodhisattva vows that one takes. And of course, as a consequence of that, you have the third limb, which is samyak vaj, the right speech. Now, right speech is extremely important in Indic civilization. Of course, you have, especially in the Vedic tradition, the importance of mantras, right? They have a ritual importance, right? The world gets spoken into existence, right? That is why, for example, the syllable Om is so important in the Vedic and Vedantic and Tantric traditions. There's a direct correlation between what we say and how it affects reality. So if I keep using swear words, this actually will affect the world around me. I'm adding more darkness into the world. I'm saying this because that happens to be my case. I was brought up in a working class city in Luxembourg, where, you know, so you have two professions there that were very represented. You had miners, you know, who were working in these mines, you know, to get to find iron, and you had you know, the factory workers. So you have two professions where swearing is almost second nature. And so I grew up in that environment, and I'm still struggling with it. It's really hard. It's because for us, it's almost second nature. And then actually we're known with this city of ours, actually known for that. So, and I was going to mention this in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, in the chapter about the siddhis, the yogic achievements. There's a very interesting power that one can achieve, which is called Vak Siddhi. So if for 40 days you only say the truth, you only speak the truth, and but also only say positive things, the fact that your speech is confirming to the truth will in turn do the following, which is that the truth / reality will confirm to your speech, right? So so things will start manifesting in your life, right? If you have this habit of speaking the truth and saying only positive things about, you know, even your worst enemies. It reminds me of an anecdote about, you know, the fourth Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. He was once asked someone asked him his opinion about Yazid, and the Imam said, he's a good poet, right? So you know, so I mean, the Imam could have, you know, spoken entire volumes about the other traits of Yazid, but he just chose to say, well, he's a good poet. And so, and this is why it's important, especially now in our age, where you know, Tolkien talks about it in his works, right? We have in the Lord of the Rings, and of course in the Silmarillion and other of his works, the idea of dark speech, the fact that the evil ones take the divinely revealed speech and then basically distort it to create, you know, the language of Mordor, for example, right? And so at the core of one of the issues at the core of the destruction of the world, or the fall of the world, is the idea of manipulation or disruption or corruption of speech. And especially in our days and in our day and age, speech is being corrupted a great deal. Right? Don't ask me, ask Jordan Peterson and how much trouble he got for it, right? So it's a really important element in the Buddhist tradition, and in not just speaking the truth and compassion. The other thing, of course, with right speech is that, well, you should speak the truth, but there's moments for it, right, as well, right? So, for example, you know, like at the present moment, because, well, I mean, I used to be quite thin before I came to Pakistan, and unfortunately, I put on weight. Yeah, I used to be slim, and Iraq didn't help. So when I'm being reminded of, of my present weight, I get a bit sensitive. So I tell, so there's ways of conveying truth. You can either tell someone, well, you're fat, or you can tell someone, why don't you shed the extra, extra, weight and bring back your old self. And that is more encouraging. So there's a way of, and it's not just the content, with right speech that matters. It's also the intonation. You might be saying something that, for example, I don't know, like it's early in the morning, you're having breakfast, and you had a really bad, sleep. And for example, I don't know, your wife asks you, where are the teacups? You can answer, they're in the cupboard, darling, or you can answer, they're in the cupboard. And so right speech is not just about the content, it's also about the intonation. It's about also the intention behind it and how you are controlling your speech. And yes, this example was taken from my life, and mea culpa, I'm a fallible human being. So beyond that, you have, of course, as a consequence, you have samyak karmanta, right action. And right action, just like the other principles, is, well, the absence of wrong action, right? So if we go back to the yamas and niyamas of the Yoga Sutras, it of course means, like not stealing, not murdering, not engaging in lustful activities, or and so on and so forth. But it also means that one has to take care of the of the very nature of the action one undertakes. So an action might be good in and of itself, but in this particular context, it actually might lead to suffering, for example. And that is why in the Buddhist tradition, a great deal of we'll find that with the Jesuits as well, right? This idea that of taking things case by case, right? So, for example, feeding animals is great, right? It's a fantastic thing, and I encourage everyone to do it. But in some cases, for example, in Iran, there have been cases of rich people feeding stray dogs that live outside of a city, but these stray dogs ended up killing a child, right? So here's the thing. So one particular action might appear to be good in and of itself, but put in the wrong context, actually might lead to more suffering, right? So there's this idea that yes, our actions should be led by compassion, but it should be intelligent compassion. It should be a compassion that actually takes into account a whole great deal of other factors before we are moved by emotion to, feed the doggies and hope that, of course, personally, I don't think that going out and killing those dogs is the best solution either, which is unfortunately what the authorities decided. So there's other solutions to take care of stray dogs. But yeah, so the one, it's this, and that is why right view is so important, right? When you undertake an action, it's really important that it has to be seen through properly, and all of the factors need to be taken into account, because the right action at the wrong time would actually make things worse. Now, connected to this is the idea of samyak ajiva, so right livelihood. There is the necessity when you're undertaking the path to make sure that your livelihood is does not come from sources that bring about suffering, right? So traditionally speaking, in the Buddhist tradition, being a butcher was not necessarily the best way of entering the path. That being said, there are exceptions to this. In Tibet, for example, you cannot live without meat. And I was very fortunate when I was studying Sanskrit in Paris that one of my classmates was a reincarnated tulku, a reincarnated lama, whose parents were French, actually. So he was one of the very few Westerners who had been recognized as a reincarnation of a great lama. And he was telling me, well, there are butchers in Tibet, and they are taught mantras that they repeat to the ear of the animal before slaughtering them, and in order to help them go, move to a better life form. But it's always with the view that, well, this is Tibet. We don't have much. We don't have a lot of things that grow here. We have to eat meat. Even His Holiness Dalai Lama actually eats meat. A lot of people might be surprised by that, but he eats meat, right? So the right livelihood is extremely important. Our source of income, the way we earn our livelihood, is extremely important for many reasons, right? It shouldn't come from a source that is connected to suffering, either for others or for myself, right? So, for example, if I earn my life, having an OnlyFans account, that won't work. That will certainly not help me on the path to enlightenment, because I might get a lot of money. Well, not in my case, obviously, but it will. I'm allowing other people to take advantage of my lack of self-esteem, and that is only plunging me, even though I'm unaware of it at that moment. But I'm plunging more and more in ignorance and darkness, and so it's really important to take that into account. Now, some professions, might per se be good and not related to suffering, but if they're conducted in the wrong way, they actually might not be, that actually might be extremely hurtful. Let's take the example of a doctor. A doctor is someone who takes an oath to heal people, right? But then what about all the doctors that participated in the experiments in the concentration camps of Nazi Germany, right? Or take, for example, people who are teaching, but who instead of teaching, actually engage in ideological propaganda work and are poisoning the minds of their students. And that's, like, if a tyrant kills your body and you die in a state of grace, well, from a Christian point of view or Islamic point of view, you'll go to heaven. If a teacher poisons your mind and corrupts your soul, and you die in that state, and that is why someone like that, a bad teacher, can do more damage than a dictator, because you're sending someone to hell through bad teaching. And this is something that also we find in the Buddhist tradition as well. Condemnation of the bad teacher also exists, right? So it's very important, again, to make sure that our livelihood is rooted in intelligent compassion. It's very, very important. So here again, I want to stress this, especially in the Western way in which Buddhism has been interpreted. People really think that some people think that you can lead a very hedonistic lifestyle, and that it's okay if you meditate half an hour a day to compensate. And I'm like, darling, that's not how it works at all in the Buddhist tradition, like at all. And of course, connected to that is the sixth element of the Eightfold Path, which is Samyak Vyayana, which is the right effort. And this is something that a lot of people take for granted. But there's this thing called, spiritual burnout. So, you find, taking the example of people in Islamic tradition, you have people who, first start on the path and they do these extra prayers and do Salatul Layl and they follow the Sunnah and so on and so forth. And then with the years, suddenly there comes this burnout moment. And this is why, because the honeymoon period of their spiritual path is over. And this is where they have to decide whether, they're on the path because of the wonderful things that they're experiencing in the first years of the way. Because, anyone who has experience in any sort of spiritual path knows that in the first years you experience wonderful things. You have wonderful dreams. Some people who, for example, pray Salatul Layl every night, after a couple of months or even years, some of them are even able to smell Jannah. I mean, that's something that, is quite common among people who take on the spiritual path. But at some point, that gets taken away from you. And then you have to decide, whether, what is going to drive your ability to stay on the path. Is it these consolations? If you're looking for these consolations, for these special experiences, you actually being driven by a desire for a desire, for the extraordinary, and you're actually no different than someone taking cocaine or taking weed or crystal meth or what have you. You're an addict. You're a spiritual addict. You're a spiritual junkie. Because you're sitting in meditation just to get that sweet samadhi and and so that eventually gets taken away from you. And why? Because you have to undergo a dark period in your life where you have to face your inner demons. And this is where right effort is really important, right? This is where you have to, really get into the midnight oil and really, meditate even if you don't want to, or pray even if you don't want to or feel like it. And you have to, you have to find a way to drive your spiritual path beyond the desire for extraordinary experiences and so on and so forth. And there's a good reason why this has been placed in the Eightfold Path, because the Buddha knew very well what people go through on these spiritual journeys. Now comes the mindfulness part, so to speak. So the seventh element is samyak smriti. So it gets translated as right mindfulness, and really it refers to the idea of concentration. But smriti actually means memory. And why is it called that? Because it doesn't just refer to the practice of seated meditation or concentration, but it really refers to the effort of achieving an all-day awareness. Meaning that whether you're on a meditation cushion meditating, or you're peeling potatoes, or making tea, or scrubbing the toilet seat, you need to be able to be in the same state. And that state is, of course, what we would call in Vedanta the witnessed consciousness, right? You need to be able to look at yourself as if you were in a movie and you observe yourself, right? And which is exactly what you're trying to do when you're meditating, right? When you're meditating, you're attempting to put yourself in witness consciousness. So you're observing your mind, you're observing your thoughts. And this habit that you gain through seated meditation needs to go into your everyday life, so that even when you're peeling potatoes, you need to be watchful over your feelings and your thoughts, because you might be, you might be peeling potatoes, but you might be thinking about, a grudge you may have about your former boss, for example. So, and you need to combat that, right? You need to take care of that, and that is why this this right, this, because all of this, of course, has to do with memory, right? So that is why it's called Samyak Smriti, right remembrance. And of course, it also has to deal with the fact that you have to right remembrance. You have to remember the right things, right? You have to focus your mind on the things that actually really matter, which is your spiritual realization. And finally, we have Samyak Samadhi, the right samadhi. And of course, with samadhi comes the whole idea of meditation. And all of that, all of this, Eightfold Path, it does not work without meditation. And as everyone will tell you, and even outside of the Buddhist tradition, if you don't have a contemplative practice, any endeavor on the spiritual path is just going to be wasted time, because you need a meditation practice to be able to observe your mind, right? This is why we sit on a cushion, we meditate, and we observe how our mind works. And why is it that I'm thinking about my former boss, and then 2 minutes later I'm thinking about vanilla ice cream, and then 3 other minutes later I'm thinking about the beach, or I don't know, the Japanese emperor, whatever. So you need to observe yourself. And the more you observe the way your thoughts, function, you're able to see patterns. Once you identify these patterns, you are able to work on actually what is covering your understanding of reality. And this is where what I was talking at the beginning. This will enable you to deepen the way you look at all the other elements of the Eightfold Path. Your right view will deepen. Your right resolve will deepen. Your right speech will improve. Your right action will improve. Your right livelihood as well. Your right effort, and so on and so forth. That is so. In a way, while all these elements are very important, this is the reason why, especially in the Zen tradition, so much emphasis has been put on seated meditation, because this is where you find your grounding, and you're able to deepen your understanding of all the other elements of the path. But at the core of it all, especially in the Mahayana tradition, is what we call the ideal of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva it's the ideal that one takes as a Buddhist. It's the one whose resolve is to achieve awakening, right? And the Bodhisattva in the Buddhist tradition takes 4 vows, right? The first one is to free all sentient beings from suffering. So our practice of meditation and so on and so forth, and of course this whole Eightfold Path, it's not just for us, right? So the ideal of the Hinayana tradition of the small vehicle is the ideal of the Pratyeka Buddha, the one who becomes a Buddha but for himself. You've achieved 9 enlightenments. That's it. You've made it. You're no longer going to come back to this world, and that's it. Goodbye. This world of tears is over. The ideal of the Bodhisattva is not that. Is that yes, you achieve enlightenment, but you want to share the merits of your enlightenment with others, and you want to make sure that just like the Platonic sage in the myth of the cavern, you want to help others come out of this river of tears that that they're living in. The second vow is that is to end the delusions that we have inside of ourselves. The third one is to enter the path through all possible gates that it has, and the fourth one is to attain enlightenment. And this is actually the fuel of the Eightfold Path, right? This idea that, especially the first vow, is that our spiritual practice cannot have just as an aim to basically just save ourselves. But we have to endeavor to help other beings, not just humans. First of all, relieve them from suffering, right? And make sure that all of them, including our enemies, are able to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime. And I will end it with this.
MashaAllah, that was beautiful. And
Thank
before
you.
we open the floor for any questions, I would like to thank you really for always making time for us. We're very grateful for that, for your generosity. So we want
Well, it's always a pleasure for me.
Salam and Ramzan Mubarak. Can you please repeat the four vows again?
Oh, wow. Sorry. Sorry.
Wow.
I'm being cheeky. Sorry.
No issues.
So the first vow is the way it's stated in the tradition is beings are numberless. I vow to save them. The second vow is delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. And the third vow is the dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. And the fourth one, how is it again? The Buddha way is unattainable, but the Buddha way is, I don't remember, very high, whatever. I vow to attain the Buddha way. That's the fourth vow, and that's that's the four vows of the Bodhisattva.
Thank you.
And as someone told me, these are vows that you can take without being a Buddhist. But actually, what makes you a Buddhist, by the way, is not. What makes you a Buddhist is something like the Shahada, is taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. If you make this declaration, then you're a Buddhist. But the fact of meditating or living according to the ideal of the Bodhisattva vows does not make you a Buddhist. So His Holiness Dalai Lama said, the Buddhist tradition is a rich treasure, and if it can help other people to become better Christians or better Muslims or better Jews or so on and so forth, all the better. The ideal of the Bodhisattva is not limited to the Buddhist tradition, and if people can improve their own faith through the practice of meditation as it's found in the Buddhist tradition, all the better. So I know people who are Buddhist Christians. I have a very good friend who's a Catholic priest, who's a great specialist of Tibetan Buddhism. His Tibetan friends call him the Jesus Lama. And when he was ordinated as a priest, his bishop said this is a Christian Bodhisattva. So I think I'm something like a Buddhist Muslim in some ways.
Yeah, you are.
Rimsha, you've raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for a wonderfully insightful talk. It was amazing. So I just had a quick question. You mentioned talking about avoiding dark speech and focusing on positive thoughts, which is a wonderful thing which we should all aspire for, and to not focus on being victims of the system. I was thinking at the same time, we learn from our traditions that it is our job to speak truth to power and to stand witness against social injustices and so on and so forth. So I was wondering, how does one balance the two? That is, how does one focus on positivity without falling into a state of complacency where you're just continuing to stay in a state of comfort and you do not want to face the ugliness of the social injustices, so you can at least have a moral stance around that?
Yeah, perfect question, actually. I'm very glad you asked that question. So for that, I'm going to go back to the 19th century and to the popes of the second half of the 19th century. So people like Leo XIII, Pius X, who developed the social teaching of the Catholic Church. And because this was the rise of both socialism and then liberal capitalism. And what they stated is that Catholicism stands against both. It's against basically liberal capitalism in the same way as it is against socialism, because both go against the truth. So workers should not be exploited, but at the same time, people do have a right to free enterprise and private property. But a balance needs to be sought, and also the state does have a duty to to help its weaker elements of society. The issue here is really an issue of perspective. There's no denial that there is social injustice. The problem is when you view the world in the way that, for example, socialism looks at the world, right? Socialism looks at the world history as the struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed, and then you have various forms of socialism. You have Marxist socialism that identifies the oppressed and the oppressor and the oppressed as social classes, right? National socialism viewed world history as the struggle between the oppressing evil races against the oppressed good races, right? So and then you have Islamic socialism, right? So the oppressed ummah versus the evil enemies, and so on and so forth. And while it is true that we have to stand for justice, the issue here is that it has to be done through a way that is compassionate and that does not demonize the other. The second I view the other automatically as as being part of the oppressor class or oppressor category, I've created an idol and I've created a category, and in its way it's a false gospel that person can never save themselves from, because in socialism you don't have a figure like Christ who dies for you, who dies for your sins on the cross. So you're always condemned, to and all of these like totalitarian regimes that are based on socialism. People just died because they belong to a certain category. Like for example, in Soviet Russia, if you were a slightly wealthy farmer, irrespective of your own personal behavior, or irrespective of of whether or not you actually oppressed other people, you were declared the enemy, and then millions of people died that way. In Nazi Germany, just the fact of being a Jewish shoemaker would place you in the same category as would put you in the category of people who were declared enemies of the Aryan race, and you exterminated. And in Islamic socialism, of course, it's the same thing, right? So you have the pure ummah that is being persecuted by its eternal enemies that are both inside and outside, and of course this changes from country to country. The Wahhabis have their version of it. The Muslim Brotherhood have their version of it. The Iranians have their own version of it. I mean, it's just never ending. And the problem is that when one does something like that, you basically imprisoning people within a category from which they can never be saved. And the way out of it is to basically, first of all, free oneself from that view, first of all. And secondly, realize that, suffering has, every single class and every category of people have their own virtues and their own vices. And a compassionate way of looking at these things, of solving these issues, is through reconciliation. It might take longer time, but in the end, it avoids genocides. And it's for me, it's always sad when people are brainwashed with these views, because it's it disenables the other person who's accused of being, an oppressor, of basically saving themselves. Whereas this more traditional view of things enables reconciliation. And that is what the social teachings of the Catholic Church have always, looked for. And that is why it presented, some people viewed corporatism as the best social implementation of those ideals. So corporatism was a socioeconomic and political system whereby people were represented not by political parties but according to the profession that they belonged to, so that the possible struggles between the employer and the employee would be solved with the help of the state, because of the necessity for cohesion of the community and the necessity to avoid civil wars and massacres and so on and so forth. And so I'm not saying that corporatism is the way. I'm just saying there are other ways, and especially in the Islamic tradition, a great deal of emphasis has always been put on the idea of reconciliation. Rather than, let's get rid of the, Marikbar, on this. That's not what our tradition, that's not what the Islamic tradition teaches. It teaches reconciliation, because even the rich, even the rich industrialist has a soul that needs to be saved. And there's always this ideal of, for example, amongst Marxist socialists, you have this glorification of the working class. And I'm working class myself. I've paid my studies by working on construction sites and so on and so forth. So yes, there are moments where the working class is being exploited, but at the same time, every class has its own vices and has its own virtues. There are great virtues amongst the working class people. There's also, the working class also has its own vices. Likewise, with people who are basically, richer, it's the same thing. And I think a worldview that condemns people and that reduces people either to their social class or their race or whatever, is just it's not conducive to anything good. And so far, any discourse that is based on this socialist view of the world has ended up in disaster. And we keep not learning the lessons. Despite of the millions of debt that socialism has produced. By the way, I'm not saying capitalism is a great system, by the way. I'm against it as well. But you get my point, right? It's about finding the balance. Yes, we have to stand for justice, but at the same time, we have to avoid, we have to avoid any reduction of the people, any reduction of people to a particular class or whatever, from which they cannot redeem themselves. That's what I'm saying.
There too, Rimsha, is that fine?
Yes, that's perfect. I just wanted to thank you for answering. It was very clear. Thanks.
There are two more people who are interested. Sajid Hussain's up. You can ask first.
Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Francisco. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask about how Buddhism and Taoism in particular, where those two religions have synergy and where those two faith systems kind of like have their differences that cannot be reconciled. So yeah, if you could shed light on those two things.
Well, how much time have you got? Well, so I'm going to tell you about what I'm working on at the moment, because I think that will give you a clear idea. So I'm working on this chapter for this book that I'm going to publish with another academic on interreligious exchanges in the Eastern Mediterranean. So in my 20s, which is like centuries ago, I was very much fascinated by Kukai, the 9th century Buddhist, thinker from Japan, one of the great civilizational heroes of Japan. And for him, in his school, one of the main practices of meditation consists in visualizing the letter A in front of oneself and then concentrating on it, because the letter A represents the unborn state of ultimate reality, right? And I'm like, well, this is fascinating. Later on, when I started reading Shi'i mystical literature, for example, the Masharq al-Anwar of Rajab Bursi, I have, he has a whole description of interpretation of the Arabic alphabet. And then he says, well, the letter A represents the unborn ultimate reality and stands for Allah. And I'm like, I've heard this before. And then a few months ago, one of my Iranian friends, who happens to be a cleric from Qom, sent me a passage from the Risalatul Wilaya of Allama Tabatabai, rahmatullah alayh. And in this book, he talks about Nafi Khawatir, the elimination of thoughts, literally speaking. But it's actually almost literally a translation of the of Nirodha. Basically, it's the idea of how to put it, appeasing your thoughts, basically, right? He says, find a corner in your house that is not too dark, not too light, where there aren't too many obstacles, where you can sit comfortably, and close your eyes and focus and visualize in front of you the letter A, and focus on it for half an hour, and don't let anything else disturb you. And I'm like, I've seen this before. So my question was, how comes a meditation technique from 9th century Japan finds its way in the book of a great Shia Arif like Allama Tabatabai? And so I've been doing detective work, and so here's what it is. It's so you have this encounter in what we call this intermediate realm between India and Iran, is Gandhara, where so I always say this: Buddhism was born in India, but it became a world religion in Gandhara. Gandhara is where we have it comprises parts of Pakistan, it comprises also parts of Afghanistan, and it's an Indo-Iranian realm. It's a realm of Indianized Iranians and of Persianized Indians, which is also another definition for Pakistan. But so what you have is that Indic civilization was actually an oral civilization for a long time, until script basically came into the subcontinent. And one of the ways it came into the subcontinent was basically the Aramaic script. We have this Middle Eastern script that was used by the Persians, because at that time the Persians, the Achaemenids, had basically taken on that entire region, and so they introduced the Aramaic script. The Aramaic script basically moved into the Kharoshthi script, and the Kharoshthi script was used to write the first, was the first script that was used basically to write the sutras of Buddhist literature. And so in that, the Kharoshthi alphabet, the first letter is the letter A, right? And so you have around that time, around the time of the first century, you have the emergence of this. Well, between 100 BC and 100 AD, you have the emergence of a new school of philosophy in Buddhism called the Prajnaparamita school. So the school of ultimate perfection, of perfect wisdom. Sorry. And amongst the teachings is the idea of meditating on the letter A. This would not have been possible without the introduction of the Koroshti script, right? So you have this idea. So you have an Aramaic script as combined to to Buddhist thoughts, and then what happens is it basically goes to this philosophy, basically, spread throughout Asia. Now we know that, when we think of Buddhism, we normally think of China, Japan, Korea, and so forth. What a lot of people don't know is that Eastern Iran, the Eastern Iranian world, which includes, Khorasan, Sistan, Balochistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, and so on and so forth, these regions were Buddhist. Even though there was a persecution of Buddhism during the Sasanian period, Buddhism was actually very strong there, to the point that, for example, one of the families that was in charge of being ministers for the Abbasids, the Barmakids, they were previously hereditary heads of a monastery in Herat. They were Buddhists. And when they converted to Islam, they didn't say like, oh, well, let's just get rid of all this kafir stuff. They took all of the beautiful stuff from the Buddhist tradition and brought it to Baghdad, right? And so what happens is that these teachings from Buddhism didn't just disappear when people converted to Islam. They were kept and they were integrated within the body of the Islamic tradition, especially in Shiism, because what happens is that the Shia were the first ones to come up with this idea of letter symbolism, the idea that the letters of the Arabic alphabet have a secret meaning. And so a lot of people attribute this letter mysticism to Musahibi and Sahl Tushtari, but actually more recent studies actually find that if we really go to the core of it, the first evidence for letter mysticism is in this quote unquote heretical book called the Kitab. So the Kitab is a book that mainstream Shias don't want anything to do with it, which makes it all the more interesting for me. So it's a book where Jabir ibn Julfi has visions of several imams up to, I think, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, where they show themselves as being manifestations of the divine. And so you have a scene where Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam is age 5, and then there's this episode where he sort of reprimands a teacher who wants to teach him the alphabet, and it tells him, well, you don't even know the meaning of Alif, you want to teach me Ba. So the Imam basically describes the meaning of the different letters. And guess what the meaning of the letter Alif is? Oh, it refers to the unborn ultimate reality. So, and then from there, it went into Sufism, and then through Sufism, it went into Judaism, and and so forth. So one of the points that Professor Amir Moezi, who's the leading specialist of Shiism in Western academia, says that Shiism has been this conduct through which all wisdom, all pre-Islamic wisdom, was kept alive and kept being transmitted, and of course shared with other traditions, because much of it went into Sufism. And by the way, when I speak about Shiism in that period, I'm not talking about the Shiism of the mullahs, like, oh, dogs are najis, this and that, follow the leader. No, I'm not talking about that type of Shiism. I'm talking about the good old school, pre-ghaiba, esoteric, mystical Shiism. Sorry?
Akhbari Shiism?
Oh no,
by
just
any
Akhbari
chance?
No, the Akhbari, the Akhbari stuff. These are 17th century discussions. The Akhbari versus Usuli, because you can have Akhbaris who are very spiritual, and then you can have Akhbaris who are absolutely anti-spirituality. You can have Usulis who are very spiritual and have You can also have usulis who are not very spiritual. And then you have people who basically, wander between the two. For example, the pre-revolution Ruhollah Khomeini believed in the tahrif of the Quran, and believed in a lot of mystical stuff, and had very strong akhbari tendencies, although he was not officially an akhbari, but very strong akhbari tendencies because of his special love for Faith Kashani. And then with time he just became the figurehead of Sulism, which is quite interesting. Interesting enough, all the stuff about the tahrif of the Quran, of course, was edited out of his works later on. But so this is a different discussion. It's more about what is the nature of Shiism? Is Shiism meant to be a school of fiqh? And the earliest works that we have clearly show that wasn't really the intention. The Imams were not really interested in. And I mean, fiqh is important, but it's one has the feeling that, especially around the time, like the early Abbasid period, when the fiqh schools start to organize themselves, we have these very interesting discussions, and it's like they're all leading each other on. For example, let's take the issue of the najasa of the dogs, right? The Malikis say that dogs are not najis, right? The Hanafi school says, well, the saliva of the dog is najis, but the dog per se is not really najis. But then you have the mainstream Shia fuqaha who say no, all of the dog is najis, even the hair, everything is najis, except for Sharif al-Murtada, the leading Shia scholar of that time, who said, no, dogs are not najis. Where did you get that idea from? So you can see that a lot of the Shia fiqh that was developed during that time was developed as a reaction to other schools within that were emerging at that time. It was really a competition of saying, well, of becoming more orthodox than the orthodox to prove that you had nothing to do with mysticism, right? So, we're not these mystical weirdos. And by the way, you guys think that dogs are just the saliva of dogs are najis. We think that all of the dog is najis. So we're more orthodox than you. So you can't accuse us of heresy. And of course, I mean, and there's loads of cases like that. You have one principle, for example, in akhbari fiqh, where, for example, if there's an issue in fiqh that you don't have an answer for, you go to a scholar of you consult the fuqaha of the mukhalafin, the non-Shia, and then you do the opposite of what they say, which of course clearly shows that this fiqh was constructed after the Imam had basically gone into the occultation, probably also because he had enough of that community. But yeah, so really at the core of authentic, early Shiism is mysticism and the ideal of the Imam as a theophany, and the idea that salvation comes through recognition of the luminous nature of the Imam. So the Ma'rifat al-Nuraniyya. So you have to realize first of all, you have to realize your own luminous nature through a contemplative life and meditation, so that you're able to see the Imam in his full of light. And that has nothing to do with present day mainstream Shiism, which is mainly identity politics and Islamic socialism. If we're into and victimhood discourses, right? Of course, which all have their reasons, but that's not what the early tradition is about. And this is where you find a lot of overlaps with Buddhism. And here's one fact, and I'll end up with this. You have this tradition of the Qadamgah in Pakistan and in Eastern Iran that are attributed to the Imams, either Imam Rida alayhi salam or Imam Ali. For example, in Hyderabad, in Sindh, you have a Qadamgah that is attributed to Imam Ali. in Nishapur, you have a Qadamgah shrine that's dedicated to Imam Rida. So a Qadamgah is a place where you find a sculpted footprints that is attributed to the Imams. But these are Buddhist shrines. The idea of honoring the footprints of the Buddha it's a Buddhist tradition. And so what has happened, what I think happened most probably, is that the people who converted to Islam in that period thought and who probably still had Buddhist roots saw Imam Rida as a sort of Buddha figure. And because of that, probably converted to Islam. And then a lot of stories that were attributed to the Buddha were then later on attributed to Imam Rida. For example, the legend of the gazelle, right? So Imam Rida saves a gazelle from being killed by a hunter. That's actually a story that comes from the Jataka, from the lives of the Buddha. I'm not saying it didn't occur, but it's really interesting that a region that was known for its strong presence of Buddhism, basically, really kept to that, kept that story and made it very important. And I think it has to do with the fact that, I mean, what's really interesting, the Italian scholar Ronconi Filippani, who translated the Kitab, he says that it's a Shi'i Vajrayana Tantra, because it says there's no other Islamic text like this, and it's very clear that through, for example, in especially in Tibetan Buddhism, you have the five cosmic Buddhas, and there's a color attributed to each one of them, in the same way that Rajab Borsi and other Shi'i mystics attribute, the same sort of similar qualities to the Panchtam, for example. And then, of course, you have the fact that Jabir ibn Hayyan, rahimullah, is included in the Tibetan Buddhist canon. So he's in the Buddhist canon. He's called Jabir the Yogi. The Tibetan Buddhists consider Jabir ibn Hayyan, the founder of alchemy and chemistry, the disciple of Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. They consider him at the same level as the fathers of the church, like Saint Augustine and Eusebius of Caesarea and Origen. That's how important he is for the Tibetans. And I think we have a great deal of reason to believe that a certain number of lucid dreaming techniques that seem to have come from the early circles around the Ahlul Bayt were transferred through the Silk Road to basically to the Gandhara region, and where they then basically went to Tibet and merged with other traditions to produce what we now nowadays call Tibetan Dream Yoga. Because there's a 19th century work that I'm working on by this great muhaddith from Najaf, Sheikh Mirza Nuri Tabarsi, who has a 4-volume work on lucid dreaming in the 19th century. 4-volume work with detailed practices on how to achieve lucid dreaming, to be able to see the Prophet and the Imams and Fatima Zahra and dead people, and have conversations with them and have teachings from them and so on and so forth. And the only tradition where you also have that is Tibetan Buddhism. And it happens around the same time. And the smoking gun for this is the presence of Jabir ibn Hayyan in the Buddhist canon. So there's a lot of commonalities between mystical Shiism and especially esoteric Buddhism, a lot. And because of politics and because of the whole obsession of pointing the finger at others and saying, you're najis, we've missed there's as I always say, there's a marriage that still needs to be conducted, and that's the marriage between mystical Islam and Buddhism. I'm not talking about syncretism. I'm talking about finally a conversation where one side doesn't view Muslims as these barbarous invaders, and the other side doesn't view the others as, these vile, najis, idol worshippers, which they're not, because there's no worship in Buddhism. So yeah, this needs to happen. And, I have to salute, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always made great efforts, especially with the Tibetan Muslim community. Like every single year when he visits Ladakh, he visits the local Husseiniya, and, he speaks very highly of the Imams. And my question is, why is it that there has not been an invitation from the shrines in Karbala for the Dalai Lama to come to Karbala? Well, isn't Imam Hussein for everyone? Or is Imam Hussein just meant for a couple of, few 100 million Shia who basically made him their Imam Hussein is for everyone. It's for Shia, Sunnis, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, everyone. And I'm still puzzled by the way that, that the fact that, the Dalai Lama has still not been invited to visit the shrine of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Because, the Pope, visited, Sayyid Sistani, okay, fine. But the Dalai Lama makes a conscious effort every single year to honor the Shia community within the because Balti people are Tibetans culturally, and they exist in Pakistan. They also exist in Ladakh on the Indian side. And the Dalai Lama has always made a conscious effort to not just entertain polite relationships. He goes inside the Imam Barga, he sits on the minbar, and he speaks about, helping us become better followers of Imam Hussein. So where's the invite?
That's very beautiful, and your connections are really intriguing. We look forward to your work on this theme. Can we take a question from Facebook by our friend Hassan? He's saying that how does helping alleviate the suffering of others help our own enlightenment or spiritual? How does it contribute to our own enlightenment or spiritual progress?
First of all, because we are all social beings. We are not born as individual units when we come into this world. We are all connected to a mother, to a father, to siblings, to a history, to a community. And our spiritual endeavors have to be connected to the community we're part of. And of course, the smaller community is our family. Then, our particular, our own particular community, whatever that may be. It may be a tribe, it may be a village or whatever. And of course, then the wider world. And the reason why is because we all have Buddha nature. We all have this universal, unborn, spotless, immaculate nature, enlightened nature that is, that is there within us. And us helping, and the nature of, the consistent quality of that Buddha nature is limitless compassion and love. And so striving to help others achieve enlightenment, but also alleviating them from suffering, is a path towards that achievement. And this is why I've always been against the whole Steve Jobs, mindfulness nonsense, where you can meditate, half an hour a day on a Zen cushion, but at the same time exploit, factory workers in China. That it doesn't work. It just doesn't. That doesn't work like that. Your effort to find enlightenment has to be consistent with the nature of the thing that you're trying to achieve. So, yeah.
Allah, that's really a very fine point. If you allow, we can end here. We could go on listening to you for another half hour. But Alhamdulillah, thanks a lot.
Welcome. You're welcome.
So look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Inshallah. Inshallah. Always a pleasure. Okay. Thank you so much.
And to all the audience, thank you for participating and being here. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you.
Khuda Hafiz.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Walaikum salam.
Khuda Hafiz.